How's it going, everyone? Paul with Adaptable Survival. What we're going to do in today's episode is go over 5 basic tarp shelters that you need to know. Let's dive into it. So what we're going to hit on are 5 basic tarp shelters in today's video that you can utilize while you're outdoors. Now, there's tons and tons of tarp shelters. If you start Googling that, look it up, you'll find countless. Like, I couldn't even give you an accurate number. When I was thinking about this idea for video, I wanted to build on it into like a longer series. And when I started looking up tarp shelters and what you can do with just a tarp, I was pretty much amazed. I'm like, there's some of them are like super complex. I don't even know how you set those up. But before we start diving into the 5 that we're going to discuss in today's video, I wanted to talk about the 2 types of shelters, in my opinion, that you're going to find. Now, this 5x7 mesh tarp from Bushcraft Outfitters, this is going to work really, really well for an emergency shelter. So, super compact. This has tent stakes, ridgeline, even another waterproof tarp inside of just this bag alone. So if I'm looking to carry something that I can utilize to, get out of the weather for a short time or in an emergency, this is a go-to. And then we have this Free Soldier 10x10 tarp. I know the dimensions are a little bit different, but in all intents and purposes, a 10x10 tarp. Now, I'm a big fan, if I'm going out intentionally to camp, of using a 10x10. Even an 8x8 is really, really handy. Now, I've used tarps that were bigger than this, and they definitely have their time and place. If you look back, I want to say probably 2 or 3 years ago, I did a wiki up shelter, and over the course of that video scene, my initial idea didn't really work out because I didn't have enough coverage, but I still made that work. By far one of the hardest nights I've had sleeping outdoors, because I was basically sleeping on one side. My leg from my hip down to my knee was so sore the next day. Story for a different day. But tarps usually come in those kind of 2 types. That 5x7 or thereabouts sizing, which is going to be an emergency tarp. Think of your Arcturus blankets, your grabbers, the Pathfinder survival blanket, all those kind of fall under that category. And anything bigger, everything from sil nylon and polyester tarps all the way up to Dyneema, wax canvas, oilcloth. Those bigger tarps are really meant for intentional camping. So enough rambling. Let's dive into the 5 basic tarp shelters that we need to know. All right, so what I did is already set up the ridgeline. I'm not going to go through that process in this video because I have done videos on that already. But the first shelter we're going to talk about is the lean-to. Probably by far one of the simplest tarp shelters you can set up. It takes very, very minimal materials to set up. So let me set this up and then we'll bring it in for a close-up. So firstly, I'm using the 5x7 for this shelter. You can do it with 10x10. It's just going to be massive. So let me just get this tarp folded out here. Actually, start over on this other side. Just feeding a loop through my other loop. Actually, I want to shorten this up a bit. And now, one of the items, or a few of the items you're going to need for this shelter setup are either some spare tent stakes, sticks off the ground, or some sort of toggle. So I'm just running that through here and then shortening this tail up. Now I come to the other side, and on my ridge line I have a prusik loop that I just bring it out where I want it to be to match up with the length of the tarp. Take another tent stake, put that through. Now I can tighten that up. Now I have that nice and tight right across the ridge line. Now I take my back corners and just line this up. Now I want to essentially make an L from the corner that I'm holding to this first toggle down the ridge line to the other toggle. And now when I stake this out, I'm creating tension across there. And this is almost going to be vertical of a lean-to just because of the height I have the ridge line, but that's all right. And now same thing, I want to create that L, or imagine I'm creating an X on the back line of the tarp here. It's simple enough, you can come through, adjust as needed. And now we have a basic lean-to set up here. Still have a little bit of waviness going in here, but I do have a tree root on this side, so may not be able to get this perfect. And that is simply setting up that lean-to. So the reason I started with the lean-to is it's going to be the easiest tarp shelter to set up in an emergency when the weather's turning on you, when you're kind of in a pinch. You know, all you're doing is stringing up that ridge line in whatever fashion you prefer, toggling out 2 points on the ridge line, and then staking out the back. Now, I could get this tarp a lot tighter if I wanted to, but you can see how this is almost bowing in. That's because the wind is coming from that direction. It's coming to the back, and that's ideally what I want, is I want that wind to come up in the back and go over me. I don't want to lose heat through different heat loss mechanisms. I did a video on that. Go back in the history and check that out. Now, this spot I'm in right now isn't ideal for camping. It's too uneven of a terrain, but for the demonstrations I'm going through today, it works perfectly because I have a lot of trees here to switch between the different shelters. But this shelter is really more designed to get you out of the rain, to give you a lot of open airflow, so you're not worrying about any condensation building up on the tarp. If it is colder out and you're using a shelter like this or something with a reflective side, you can have a fire in front of you, but also not get burnt out of your shelter, or roasted out of your shelter. So first tarp shelter I always recommend people to set up lean-to, but obviously your weather conditions are going to dictate which one of these shelters works best for you. Now for our second shelter, we can easily transition from this lean-to into a plow point. That is just having 1 point a little bit higher than where our ridge line's at. So for that one, I'm just coming over here, pushing this prusik loop in so I can remove that tent stake. Taking this one, keeping that tent stake there. Removing this one out of the ground. And now what I can do with my ridge line, I can either undo it so I can easily adjust this, or depending how tight I have this, and now I don't tighten this as tight as a guitar string, let's say, you know, I leave some slack in there so when I pull this, I can easily lift this up if I had to transition my tarp shelter for whatever reason. But now what I can do with this back point is I can come out in any direction I want to from here. I can come directly in line with the ridge line itself, or I can bring this out. Now by bringing this back end out here, you can see how the tarp starts to become nice and taut. I just come down, and I'm not too worried about this initial stake going in and permanently being here. This is essentially just holding it while I get the wings staked out. I'll come to this first one, take out my handy dandy tent stake, and then just come out to where I'm creating a nice tight tarp structure. And then I'm coming over to this other side where the tent stake is still in that loop, and now just creating a nice and tight structure. And now I can come back to this back stake and readjust this. and that's all right if you have to readjust things. I'm working with some soft soil here, so that is to be expected. So now, as we can see, we have a shelter that's giving us two sides, where the lean-to was only giving us one. That's going to give us additional protection from the elements. Now, like I said, this spot that I'm in isn't ideal for intentionally camping out here, but if I needed to get out of the weather, for a quick rain shower or something like that, I can set this up and be protected from whatever direction that weather is coming from. If I were to camp out here and I have this set up in an ideal spot, this would give me somewhere to sleep, more than enough room for me in here. I could lay down here and still have some headroom. If it was colder and I was using a reflective tarp, I can have a fire out in front of me, collect a lot more of that radiant heat to stay a lot warmer. So having some sort of reflective tarp, whether that is one of the cheaper SOL Mylar blankets or survival blanket, emergency blanket, either one of those options are going to work. The Mylar blanket, what I wouldn't do, and this is something I learned from Josh Enyart, is you could tape that to the inside of this, and now you have a tarp you can constantly train with, and then have that emergency option always ready. So now we've hit on two of the basic tarp shelters we need to know. With where I have this ridgeline set, we can move in to that third shelter. So all I'm going to do is come through, take these tent stakes out, clean them off so I don't make my tarp all gnarly. Set these off to the side. And now I'm still coming up to this main point. Forgot one tent stake. Getting ahead of myself here. So now, remove all of those. And now I can come back to this loop here off that modified trucker's hitch. Now, if you have this attached with a carabiner or some sort of other method, a Prusik loop can take the place of this. Now, the main reason I like this mesh tarp is along the sides, the short ends, you have a loop in the middle here, and that can come in play for this next shelter. So all I'm going to do is get this tarp over the top, line up where those middle loops are, and we're moving into a fly. Get this attached in here before I start rambling again. Take one of my extra tent stakes here. Not going to need these other two, but I'm just coming to this other center loop here, moving that Prusik loop out however far I need to, so I'm able to run it through. Bang, bang, done. And now we have that initial part of a fly done. Where the second part is going to come into play is we are going to stake out each corner with a guy line. Now I'm going to stake out 3, and I'll bring you back in close for the last one. So as you see, I have the 3 corners staked out and have that initial framing that I want for this shelter. Now, let me lift up this corner that's not staked out yet. Where I have this right now is a little high for how I would use this, but let's just say it's a downpour rain coming straight down on me. This would work, give me a ton of ventilation throughout here. If I had some sort of bivvy or a mesh tent, I could put that under here and have an improvised rain cover. Now, we are going to stake out this last corner, so let me bring you in for that. So now with this last corner, so as you can see, there are loops tied into this tarp. I just have my guy lines, and with these ones, I just have that bowline tied in there. Just give me some slack there. And what I'm actually going to be doing is I'm putting that bowline right through this loop, and I'm just going to make a running bowline. Bowline, bowline. I know someone's going to correct me in the comments, so it is what it is. And now if we look at that loop and that bowline, I just ran it in through itself. I can tighten that down so that holds that in place. Let's go stake this out. So now with this final corner, I'm taking that guy line, pulling it tight to where I need, where it lines up and gives me that A shape on the tarp itself. But I'm just running this down to where I need it. I'm taking the running end and I'm just throwing it over the top. I'm creating a loop here. And all we're doing is making a marline spike. So now I have that loop in the line. Take my tent stake, put it in there. Let's trap that down. Got that in there. And now I just come here, stake that in at an angle, and now we're good to go. So with staking out those 4 corners, if we look at the tarp itself, we've created an A. Now, with a fly, we can have it at this extreme angle here, or we could widen this out. Essentially what you're doing is you're creating a rain fly. Think of that part you put over your tent when you're done setting up the body. You put that top over it to protect you from the elements. That's the same principle we're doing here. Now, I have this really, really high for the demonstrations I've been going through, but you can easily drop this down to whatever height you desire. And we'll actually be moving into a lowered version of this particular style with this A shape as we move on to the next shelter. So we've knocked out 3 shelters that are very, very simple to set up. We are done with the Bushcraft Outfitters mess tarp, that 5x7. Now we're moving on to the big house, the Free Soldier tarp. I just picked this up a week or 2 ago, so I haven't used this at all. Watched a lot of reviews on it, seen some really good things, and for 40 bucks, hell, you can't go wrong. So, like I said, with that last shelter, we were going to easily transition to something else. Now, with that 5x7, you can set this up, but the space is going to be very, very limited. Now, as I'm dropping stuff all over, like I said, this is the very first time I'm taking this out. So what we're going to do is get this fully laid out here. And now what we want to do, same thing we did with the fly, is we want to find that middle point. Now, just looking at this, I know one thing is for certain. We are going to need to move this ridgeline down before we go any further. So like I said, I have this tight. I haven't retied this at all this entire video. But I'm just bringing this down probably about to mid-stomach. Come over on this other side. Now this side may not be as easy to move down, but we'll make do. And we're about the same height. So what we're going to do, same thing we did to set up that fly. Make sure we grab one of our tent stakes. Now come back to that tarp and let's find our middle loop. The nice thing with this tarp that I'm seeing initially is not only does it have a loop, but that loop has a grommet. And we'll get a close up in here in a minute. But let's get this tarp up on this ridge line. And now, same thing. I'm coming to that loop, and I'll run this through the grommet for something a little bit different. You gotta change hands every once in a while. And then now, I'm just coming with the rest of this tarp, lining up where the midpoint is of the tarp. So now I have that other one. And now I can just move my prusik loops to whatever length I need. And that's going to seem about right there. I feed that prusik loop through, grab my tent stake, slap that bad boy in, tighten it down. Step one is done. The next thing we move to is staking out each corner. I'm gonna get that done, bring you back in. So as we can see with lowering of that ridge line, we've essentially took our fly from being in the air and dropped it to the ground. Also think back to when I was talking about setting up that lean-to when we were staking up the back corners. You want to create that L with the length of sides of the tarp, as this damn fly flies around my head. But the additionally thing that can make this really, really simple for you is we see this line going from one corner to the next. We want to take this last corner that we're going to stake out, and essentially we want to get it to where we're making an X, getting that nice flat lay from this corner to that corner. And all I'm doing is taking this 10 stake and running it through this loop down here. The other thing that I'm doing is keeping in mind with that L that I told you about. So I'm going from that attachment point down all the way over here. And when I do that, it makes keeping this tarp nice and tight extremely easy. Almost, you don't even have to think about it. Now, as we can see, I have loads of coverage on the inside, and we'll hop in here in just a second. But now I can literally camp under this with just a ground sheet, my sleep system, and be good. Really good for warm weather when there is some potential weather coming in, or if it's raining. This will give you coverage. Since it is 10 feet long, you're gonna have, you know, a couple feet on each side. So now if we look on the inside here, man, you're getting so much coverage with this setup. Now obviously it can still be a little bit tightened up, and there is additional tie-out loops all across this tarp, so you could really get this nice and taut. But for our demonstration, this makes a really good visualization of dropping that fly from above us down to the ground. Now we have complete coverage on the sides, and the only way in and out are on the sides. We could block up one side and trap body heat if we needed to. In further videos, we'll talk about how we can modify this further to make it all enclosed to be really, really warm. Maybe not all enclosed, but show an evolution of this shelter. And these shelters are not very, very hard to set up. Now, the last one we're going to move to in just a second can easily be done from this position right here. So like I said, from this A-frame, we can move into that fifth and final shelter. So what I'm going to do, remove these 10 stakes, throw them back there. Toss that on the back side. Now we have one free side that is moving freely. I'm just coming up to where I have the ridge line attached. Just loosen that slack a little bit, or loosen that tension a little bit, I should say. Now we're taking those front corners that we just unstaked and bringing them to the ridge line. That in there, tighten that up a little bit, because we are still going to have to tighten the other side here. And we're coming on the opposite side, taking that out, bringing this front loop up to the top, feeding that through, staking that out, come back over here, tighten that up. Now from here, we're going to hop onto the back side. Coming from, actually, start on this side. I'm undoing this back corner here. And essentially all we're doing is we're shifting that A-frame around. So now, instead of having another corner staked out, we are going to get that center loop, bring this down to where we can stake this out, keeping in mind of that L and creating the X on the back side. Come over to the other side, rinse and repeat, throwing the excess of the tarp underneath, taking this back corner, keeping everything nice and aligned here. Now, as you see, we essentially have our lean-to set up on the ridgeline. But you might be asking yourself, what are we going to do with this excess below? Now, this is where having a 10x10 tarp can be extremely versatile and multifunctional. Let's say we don't have a ground sheet with us. We can use a 10x10 tarp to create one. So all we're doing is taking that front corner, still same principles apply, creating that L shape, keeping it nice and tight. Got that one stake down, grabbing this other front corner, bringing it out. And there's some branches in the way here, so this isn't going to sit perfectly, but and I can simply come back over here, tighten this up, not try and drive this tent stake into a tree root, which I may have that issue. So as I said, this isn't obviously ideal because we have those branches underneath the top part there, but same principles apply. You just got to find the right camp space. I'm only using this place because it has the best amount of trees, the equal length that I need. I could probably have done it on this side, but you get the point. We want to fold that other half, the extra 5 feet underneath, creates that ground sheet. Now we have the envelope, gives us protection from the ground where we can put our stuff on, don't have to worry about that getting tore up, and then have protection from the elements. The one caveat with this shelter is you have to have a strong tarp to do this. It's going to work really, really well with wax canvas or oilcloth. This is, I believe, a polyester, maybe even be a nylon ripstop. It's strong enough to withstand this. But if you're getting stuff into like sil nylon, Dyneema, those will work, but you're gonna have to take some care in where you're setting that up, making sure there's not a bunch of extra sticks, rocks, or anything underneath that could really tear up that tarp. So this is just another element to a 10x10 tarp that we can use to make our kit as versatile and as multifunctional in reality as possible. So that was going through 5 basic tarp shelters for the outdoors. Now, these can be used whether in an emergency or if you're intentionally camping. Leave me alone. It's like 90 degrees out here. I can't talk. I'm roasting to death. So I'm sure someone's going to hop in the comments, say, hey, I would never camp in that area, or that last shelter isn't set up properly. And that wasn't my intention, to show these picture perfect, because life isn't picture perfect. My goal with this video is to show you what you can do with various size tarps that you can carry in your pack for emergencies or if you're out there camping, and the versatility and actual multifunctionality of those tarps. A lot of times people online will say this is multifunctional just because I can throw it on something or it does this, that, and the other, but how well does it do that? We'll talk about that in another video, but I'm just hoping that this gives you some good ideas for tarp shelters you can start utilizing for your outdoor adventures. As I said in previous videos, keep your comments respectful and in a good learning environment. If you decide to act an ass in the comments, expect it to come back for you, because we will show no mercy. Cobra Kai for life. The tarps that I used were the Free Soldier and the Bushcraft Outfitters Mess Tarp. The Free Soldier tarp got off Amazon for like 40 bucks. So far I really, really like the quality. The Mess Tarp I've had for probably close to 5 years now. Haven't used it a ton, but it's a nice little handy tarp, and I made a whole kit out of that one pouch, which I'll do a video on here shortly. The thing I will say with Bushcraft Outfitters, unfortunately they will be closing down, so they are running a sale right now where you get, I think it's like 15% off. So hop over there, show them some support while they start figuring out that next step in their journey. I'm not affiliated with Bushcraft Outfitters or paid or given anything from them. I just want to give shout out to a small USA company that's making USA made products that unfortunately for whatever reason didn't quite work out. So go over there, show them some support. If you're coming across this video and it's past when they've already closed down, there's plenty of other companies out there making similar tarps. Just find one that suits your needs. Do me a favor, hit that like, share, and subscribe. That gets more eyes on the community that we're building here, helps bring more people into that community so we can grow our knowledge base and learn together and grow together. As always, this has been Paul with Adaptable Survival. Adapt your mind, your body, and your gear.